Welcome to On the Beat, where we bring you a different Buffalo Bills beat reporter every week, exclusively on the Overreaction Sports Network.
Welcome in, everybody. This is On the Beat, and you're watching the Overreaction Buffalo Sports Network. We are powered by Believe and presented by FanDuel. And my guest tonight, he writes and covers the Bills for Syracuse.com. He is also one half of the Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. You can catch him and Matt Perino weekly as they bring good stuff with you. And also Matt Beauvais now that's joined you as well. I believe it's Matt Beauvais. Is that correct?
Josh Reed and Carl
Josh
Jones.
Reed, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Josh Reed and who?
Carl Jones from
Carl Jones.
WIVB.
You have to forgive me, guys, so don't hold it against me. But anyway, Ryan Talbot's with us tonight. Ryan, I appreciate you coming on and joining the show. What's going on, man?
Hey, not too much here. Refreshed after that bye week and a big Bills win coming off of it. So the fans are a lot happier now than they were pre-bye and during the bye, obviously. So that makes life a little bit easier for us as well.
Let's get into the game. Some of the things you saw down in Carolina this week, some of the things you liked, some of the things you observed and stuff. I've got a lot of things of this game that I liked, some changes that I thought were great, especially defensively. Just kind of your overview of that victory against the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, starting on the offense side of the ball, obviously you have to talk about James Cook and just the job of the offensive line in that matchup, the blocking ability, especially on the left side of the line early in the game. They were creating large running lanes for Cook where he was going untouched for quite a few yards. And then obviously Cook being as elusive as he is, he can make a few guys miss along the way, breaks a few really long runs off. It's funny because we're sitting here and it's coming off of a 40-9 victory. And there's still, some things to complain about on that side of the ball. And on Monday, you hear from Sean McDermott and the need for this team to be two-dimensional on offense. They're running the ball extremely well, but now the pass game's struggling. Years ago when he was talking about being two-dimensional, it was the exact opposite with
Right.
Brian Dable in here. You had Josh Allen throwing it all over the field, but they couldn't run the ball effectively. So it's just the matter of finding that happy medium because, Josh Allen admitted it. He did not look good in the first half of that matchup. He was off target. He had happy feet. A lot of guys weren't getting open for him either. And then he took some short gimmies in the second half, one that Khalil Shakir took for a 54-yard touchdown off of about a 4-yard throw. So there was good and bad there. They didn't have to pass much, but still have some concerns on that side. And then defensively, the defensive line, what a performance by that unit. Led by Michael Hoyt. I thought Hoyt coming off of that 6-game suspension looked like he's been playing all year. No rust that was shaken off, 6 pressures, I believe, sacks, pressures galore, quarterback hits. And the versatility is what I know the Bills loved about him. It's why they signed him to a 3-year deal this offseason. The ability to play off the edge, go back into coverage, kick inside to defensive tackle, and obvious pass rushing down. You saw a little bit of everything there, which obviously when they're playing so well up front, it helped on the back end as well.
And obviously an area that you're going to have to see this week against Mahomes and the Chiefs is that pass rush. And, I think one thing, Hoyt coming to the table, obviously the loss of Ed Oliver is huge. And when you watch Ed, and I studied a lot of him on All 22 and some of the stuff he was doing, it was Pro Bowl level stuff. Ed has gotten to a level where he is really good, like a top player in the league. And to not have him on this roster, obviously, is going to hurt. But you look at Hoyt, you look at Larry, you look at Ogunjobi, these guys come in. And Ogunjobi is, doesn't have that pop that Ed does, but he is a very good veteran player that knows how to play in this game. I think it's the first time in a while, Ryan, that we've seen this emergence of this defensive line, and maybe not in the form that we expected. Maybe we thought TJ Sanders instead of Deion Walker or, the other guys, but this defensive line now all of a sudden has become a strength for this defense.
A massive strength. Deanne Walker is looking like the steal of day 3, not just for the Bills, but league wide, the way he's playing. He is making impact plays every single week, whether it's run defense or getting after the quarterback. It's funny for a player that size. The thing about him was, well, he's actually pretty good about pressuring the QB. He needs to work on his run defense. I've seen a lot of instances where he's blowing up run plays now for the Bills, getting off, shedding those offensive linemen early in the backfield, and hard to get around him when you're in the backfield right after the snap. So he's been so impressive. He's just one of those guys that when you go back and rewatch games, you can zero in on him and you see the flashes, and it's only going to get better with time and experience in this system and scheme. So he's certainly helping in the middle. You hope that when TJ Sanders comes back from the IR, that maybe the speed slows down a little bit. Sometimes it is beneficial for young players to get to watch a little bit and learn that way. So excited to see what that looks like. Ogunjobi obviously is a player that's going to see an increased role now, and I like what he brings to the table. Jordan Phillips signed today. He had a sack in that matchup, can still win from time to time. So they're going to need a lot of guys to step up on the interior, but then off the edge, we've seen the flashes from Bosa. Rousseau had a great game. Epinesa with the interception and sack. So you're starting to see them win across the line, which I don't know if I envisioned this type of performance because it was so phenomenal. But the work that they were putting in this summer, you could see that they were on the cusp of something good there. Now, can they replicate this every week? Probably not. But if they can get a little bit of pressure, even a fraction of this, it's going to lead to good things week in and week out.
Obviously, with the addition of Jordan Phillips to the 53-man roster, there's now some practice squad spots open. The Bills brought in 4 D tackles today to work out. Kind of maybe what you know about them. I know you put some stuff out there about them coming in for workouts today.
Yeah, Raekwon Davis is the biggest name of the 4, former second-round pick. He spent 4 years with the Miami Dolphins, was with the Indianapolis Colts last year, and wasn't with any team this offseason, but a talented player, good run stopper. He would make a lot of sense to add to the practice squad. And then Keandre Coburn is another one of the 4 names that I really liked. I think that he's another potential fit with that opening. You want to bring in a mix of players. Obviously, they have Zion Logue already there. Mathis already on the practice squad as well. But, after losing at Oliver, I wouldn't mind if they added a 3rd defensive tackle because those elevations go by quickly. And to be able to rotate them would be a good idea.
Obviously, we just talked about Deanne Walker, and Deanne Walker's game film against Baltimore doesn't look like what it showed this past week. He's gotten better and better each week. Technique's gotten better, more comfortable. He even looks better physically, like he's starting to feel good. How did you feel about Maxwell Hairston now coming back his first week? First of all, I was pretty shocked that he played played as much as he did. And then I think the play that was indicative, Ryan, of just what he can do for this defense was that big tackle he made against the sideline. He had about a 10-yard cushion. That ball was caught quickly, and that fast he stepped in the ground downhill. And instead of like what we've seen, the tackle made 8-9 yards downfield, it was for almost no gain. Kind of your thoughts on Hairston and how he performed in Charlotte.
Really impressed with his performance. Early in the game, he was targeted twice. Didn't give up completions on either. One of them was a defensive penalty on the Bills on, I believe it was Jordan Poyer. So that one didn't really count, but he was sticky in coverage. He was showing some really good ability. And I'm right with you. I did not expect him to play in this game. They opened the practice window at the beginning of the week. I say, okay, they're going to ramp him up a little bit. Maybe you debut him against the Chiefs, which, in many ways, I think the Bills drafted him with Kansas City in mind, with his speed, being able to counter what they have with Worthy and needing some deep speed with some of the other weapons that they have on that team. But to get him in Carolina that quickly, again, it didn't look like there was much rust there. And the play that you mentioned was phenomenal. They get the ball out quickly to Jimmy Horn Jr., and all of a sudden, before you know it, he's there, and he's being physical at that point of attack, where the physicality, the tackling, those were, I don't want to say knocks on him, but they weren't necessarily strengths on his draft profile. And he brought that physicality on the play. That's what you want to see out of a young player, because all the intangibles are there. They haven't drafted a player like this. They've gone more so for players that fit their scheme. This is someone that's a little bit undersized, but great speed. So it was a good check for for a first performance. The big test awaits, but for 35% of the snaps, give or take, rotating with Trey White, I was really encouraged.
Also we saw Jordan Hancock as well, and the way they employed him in this game plan where they played Poyer in early downs, brought Hancock in on, passing downs. Now that might be a little bit harder to do this week, considering that Kansas City's so good at running a no huddle. And if they're not making changes, the Bills aren't going to be able to make changes either. Do you think that Jordan Hancock has the ability to play first and second down if he needs to? And is that the plan as they get him more comfortable in this defense?
I think he has the ability, but I also think Sean McDermott loves how Jordan Poyer has kind of stabilized the safety position
and he has
half. And you have to take some trade-offs. He is not the same athlete that he was a few years ago. When he takes a bad angle, the recovery is just not going to be there for Poyer at this point. But he knows the positioning. He knows where he's supposed to be. I think he's helped Cole Bishop quite a bit too in terms of what he should be looking for pre-snap. Bishop's been playing with a lot of confidence, in my opinion, especially since Poyer entered the game against Atlanta. So the last 6 quarters, and that leads to good things. But for Hancock, he deserves a lot of credit for saving a touchdown in that performance last week, where he ran down Rico Dowdle on a play where I don't think any other safety on this Bills team would have necessarily been able to catch him. Mm-hmm. So great athlete out of Ohio State. You love the position flexibility. I think the Bills want him to solely be a safety, but if they're in a pinch, he could play kind of a nickel cornerback type of role for this team and be a hybrid player. I like what he brings, but they're going to want to see more out of him, more reps, more opportunities in practice before, McDermott's willing to probably turn over those early down snaps. It's going to be that, or Poyer's really going to have to be out of place a few times before I think they transition to the early downs for Hancock.
Obviously the defense, they didn't play Rapp. Obviously Rapp is out. They kept Bernard out of the game. Shaq Thompson played very well and actually covered receivers and backs very well. Their base front with Andreessen and also Dorian Williams, I thought looked very, very good. You talk about Poyer's presence and stabilizing the back end, employed a lot of man under 2 deep in this game. As we roll to Kansas City, do you think we'll see more of this, or do you think we fall back into the deep Tampa cover 2 middle linebacker with Bernard and go back to some of the spot drop type zone coverages that we've seen and obviously have had issues defending Kansas City with in the past?
Yeah, I was going to say, I would almost like to see more of what we saw last week with
I
more
agree,
man and things against Kansas City. 1, they're not used to seeing that out of Buffalo. And 2, that's probably a more realistic way to slow them down. Anyone that watched the game on Monday night, the Chiefs made some of the same mistakes that the Bills and the other teams have made this year. Kelsey having a ball bounce off of his hands. But in terms of purely covering them and try to force some stops and not, have to depend on turnovers, I feel like the blueprint from last week makes a lot more sense against Kansas City. And let me be the first to admit I was 100% wrong on Shaq Thompson. When they signed Thompson this offseason, I said, I really don't know what this guy has left in the gas tank. The last 2 years, he had played 6 total games because of injuries. He's been healthy. He's been phenomenal. The Epinesa interception,
was because of him. Yeah.
Was because, he knew exactly what that was, and he was motioning and positioning guys and, almost trying not to give it away in terms of, I know what's about to come right now. And I'm sure all those years in Carolina helped a little bit. He played under that defensive coordinator. He played under, Canales last year. But at the same time, he's just such a savvy veteran that I think he can bring that experience no matter who the opponent is, because he's looked at so much film in his career that he's going to be really good on the fly on the field with those situations.
Ryan, it's the first time in a long time I felt a sense of stability out of that defense this past weekend, that things were stable. They weren't chasing themselves. Like, they knew what was going on. It was solid. It was sound. There was pass rush. There was gap integrity. The first time in a while I felt that way.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it has to go to Sean McDermott kind of taking over some play calling duties. And I know he said after the game, we've been doing this, we've been sharing the play calling duties. I can't really recall a game where from the first quarter on, I saw a play sheet in his hand where he was clearly, over the face calling things from the very beginning. And, this is not a knock on Bobby Babich. A lot of people say, well, maybe this shows that Babich just isn't a good DC. Look how many years it took McDermott in this league to become the defensive coordinator that he was for the Bills to be interested in bringing him in as a head coach. He had the years in Philadelphia where he got fired there as a disciple of Jim Johnson. He goes to Carolina, and there's a few, I don't want to say rough years, but it didn't start out hot. And then all of a sudden he came into his own. This is not a bad thing for Bobby Babich to kind of have McDermott calling plays and maybe, leaning on each other a little bit in game. It's very difficult for a young coordinator to press all the right buttons. And McDermott doesn't do that either, but he knows, this defense, the ins and outs. It's his system. Babich said it a few weeks ago. This is a Sean McDermott defense. I'm essentially calling it. Now that you have McDermott calling that, it's no surprise that all of a sudden the players look more comfortable. The plays in terms of what they're doing, how they're playing these opponents make a lot more sense. It looked like he took over a little bit in the second half of that Atlanta game. And sure enough, Atlanta went from running wild with Drake London and Bijan Robinson to really having trouble against the Bills in the second half. And it just was the offense that couldn't get it going in that one, to now 6 quarters of a pretty promising defensive performance.
Ryan Talbot joins us, covers the Buffalo Bills for Syracuse.com, also part of the Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. And we're happy to have him on the Overreaction Network on the beat, as we do weekly on Tuesdays, presented by FanDuel. And, man, all right, let's get into it. We've 17 minutes in. We waited this long. Just kind of your assessment of the play of our quarterback, Josh Allen. What are you seeing out of this offensive passing game? Maybe concerns you have, and maybe some things you'd like to see to help get Josh back on track and out of this rut over these last so many games.
Yeah, so first of all, with the last few games, they're making things too difficult for Allen. McDermott's alluded to it. Some of the routes and the concepts that they're running, it doesn't make much sense with the skill position players that they currently have on this roster. The lack of separation is very noticeable, and it doesn't always fall on the receivers either. There are multiple plays, or at least a handful of plays in this last game where Allen had someone open, a wide open Elijah Moore, when the safety falls and he misses him. And there was a play where I think it was supposed to be Kincaid running out on the route, but he blocked and he didn't really run. So he turned and tried to throw it to Ray Davis, and he was off the mark there. I think an accurate pass, Davis turns it upfield for at least a few yard gain rather than an incomplete pass. So his feet are getting a little bit happy at times where I don't think they necessarily have to. And that's leading to inaccurate balls. And I feel like he has to get into a rhythm. So those easy passes, the quick passes, Shakir, keep those in there. Those have been bread and butter for the Bills. But you also have to start doing things that we haven't seen this season. We have not seen enough quick passes to the backs out of the flats. And, I don't know why that is, but you have James Cook, great pass catching back. You have Ty Johnson, an excellent pass catching back, and you're just not utilizing them in this offense. And, sometimes it's the personnel packages. You're keeping Johnson in to block at times. And when you have these jumbo packages, you don't have ideal guys out there. But no matter the package, I want to see the backs go out a little bit more and be targeted in that game. I want to see more crossers, things that you can kind of win with in that area. Don't make things so difficult, because they don't have the best wide receiver room. I think Joshua Palmer was set to break out against Atlanta, and then unfortunately that injury took place. He is a guy that can separate. Khalil Shakir is very good at what he does, but he's not a downfield separator. He can separate quickly in the slot, and we've seen him take just short passes and go the distance in other ways too. But, keep utilizing him that way. Keon Coleman, I almost feel like the Bills have to, I don't want to say phase out, but I feel like sometimes they're trying to feed him the ball too much. And when his game are contested catches, back shoulder plays, you have to kind of pick and choose the opportunities when you're going to do that. Some of those targets in the season have felt like lost downs or wasted downs, where it then puts the Bills behind the chains a little bit. And that's when they really start to struggle.
Ryan, I kind of wanted your thoughts on this. And when I watched Josh play and I watched some of the things that have happened over the last 3 games, One thing that I think that these last couple teams have done well, starting with New England, then Atlanta, teams are really doing a really good job in their packages or pressure packages of keeping him in the pocket, not allowing him to extend plays or at least get outside where he feels comfortable. Then you add the aspect of, I think the offensive lines had a little bit of confusion on who to pick up, because if you talk about Shakir and verticality, we can get verticality out of our slot receivers inside, right? And if you watch that play where Dion doesn't step down and pick the linebacker up and goes out, Josh gets sacked, Shakir is open about 15, 20 yards in the middle of the field. If he has time, maybe he finds him and hits him. With that being said, do you think the Bills have to figure out how to get him moving again? Because he just looks so uncomfortable standing in the pocket, and we've never seen him sacked as many times as he has over the last 3 games inside of the tackles, inside of the pocket. I almost want to see him not bootlegs, but just half rolls and get him moving right off the snap to get him at least comfortable. Your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. Rollouts are very important, I think, to kind of get him feeling a little bit more comfortable. When it comes to staying in the pocket, the part of his game was a few years ago, there weren't always spies on him. So if there wasn't someone watching him, he could take off and run and do that very effectively. Almost every team now is spying him, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. And then you mentioned some of the other factors at play here. Some of these defenses the Bills have gone against, they have done a really good job of hiding what they're doing pre-snap, and they're confusing Allen in the offense a little bit. He thinks he sees one thing, but then they get out of it after the snap, and it makes life more difficult. And the sliding of the offensive line, sliding them to the right on that play where it still would have worked out, as you mentioned, had Dawkins, picked up the right player in that situation. He probably doesn't take that sack because the player came flying in untouched, essentially, where that's the only way you can usually get Allen. If he sees the guy coming, he can usually elude and evade. So it's been a combination of things, and I think all of that has led to the happy feet that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And when your feet, you can't trust your feet, that gets your accuracy off a little bit. So, the one thing I'll say is he's had a lot of success in his career throwing the ball against Kansas City. That's a very good defense. Late in games, they usually can scheme up some things that especially in playoff games that have gotten him a little bit. But I think this is a chance for him to get right. He seems to play his best, especially regular season, and I'll say playoffs too, against Kansas City.
And what's funny is, people talk about his mechanics. 2 of the best throws he's made all season were both ruled completions and then overturned on replay. One was Shakir on the sideline against Atlanta, then more this week. That to me is vintage Josh. When things aren't right, we hit some of those, then the other stuff happens. But good points made. I appreciate what you had to say. And, it's funny. I just sometimes think we get wrapped up in just add a receiver, everything will be better. And I don't know if it's that easy, right? I just don't know if it's that easy. But something else that's not easy is obviously Chiefs coming into town this weekend, take on the Bills. Chiefs laying 1.5 points from FanDuel, and this game kicks at 4:25. Your thoughts on this matchup? Maybe a couple of key things that you see out of this, when you analyze this game rolling in Orchard Park this weekend.
It's a weird matchup from the perspective of how many years in a row have we watched these two teams play in the regular season where they're both first in the division and they're vying for the number 1 seed in the AFC. They're entering this game both, in second place in their division, both with multiple losses at this point. It feels a little bit different. Going into this from that perspective, but man, Kansas City right now, they're rolling. They should be feeling pretty good about things. Worthy comes back a few weeks ago. They get Rice off the suspension, and all of a sudden the offense starts clicking where it was struggling for a while without both of them in that lineup. And now they just pose so many problems where they're just so deep in this roster. I mean, you talk about Worthy and the speed and the aspect that he brings in terms of you have to make sure you don't get beat deep against him. Rashee Rice is just a complete receiver, can hurt you in many ways, is a true number 1 for that team. But then they still have Hollywood Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, even Tyquan Thornton, when those guys were out, was making big plays down the field. They're just so deep, and you throw in Travis Kelce. I know Isaiah Pacheco is most likely not going to play in this one, but they have a nice young back there too. So they're as complete as ever. They're coming off of multiple wins. They look like they're getting right on offense. But the one thing I know is this is one of those games where every time they play each other, the Bills and the Chiefs, that is, it's always a back and forth where maybe one team gets off to a hot start, but the other team will make the stops needed. I expect this one to go down to the wire just like every other game seems to between the two of them. It's going to be up to this Bills defense, though, to come up and try to replicate some of the success that they had against Carolina. They don't need to necessarily have 7 sacks in this game from their D-line, maybe 1 turnover and force a few punts. But that's what's needed in this game, because right now, Kansas City's offense is firing on all cylinders, where the Bills, they're going into this game and they're probably going to tell the Chiefs, try to stop James Cook. And then, oh, by the way, we do still have Josh Allen, who, despite some struggles as of late, what he can do as the reigning MVP. It's going to be a slugfest. It's going to be very fascinating, too, because the team that loses this game is going to have a lot of ground to make up within their own division.
Right.
And, with Buffalo, you look at New England, Atlanta this week. I think it's Tampa Bay in 2 weeks. Some more difficult maybe than what they've played, but still very winnable games for New England. They're taking care of business. And then if the Chiefs lose this, Denver right now is looking pretty good on both sides of the ball. Obviously, a big loss with Surtain for the next few weeks on defense, but one of these two teams are going to fall into a hole, and it's going to maybe change the perspective of, one of them might end up being a wild card team come playoff time. I'm not ready to say that if the Bills lose this. I still think there's enough time for them to catch New England, but in the AFC West, that's a very competitive division minus the Raiders.
Exactly. You brought that up. You brought the Denver Broncos up that are playing so well. And then you got the Chargers also. And when they're healthy, they're good. So it's the first time in a while we've seen Kansas City actually have to have a little bit of stress in their own division. But when you look at this matchup, it's funny. You look at numbers. And one thing that I think bodes well for the Bills is that, and I don't know why I found this obscure stat, but I did find it. The Chiefs are 32nd in the league because they're first in the league playing the deep pass, and they're third in the league playing quick passes or moderate passes, but they're 32nd in the league in the NFL playing play action. So obviously that falls into play with the Bills as far as, their chance to make big plays. Those defensive backs are very aggressive in their pass. The other thing I found that was interesting, the Chiefs allow opponents to scramble more often than most at a 9.4% clip. So we've got some strengths that work out, but I'm like you. Throw everything out the window. It usually doesn't matter. This is usually an exciting game, and it's a great one to watch, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and the 2 points that you just mentioned, the scrambling, that's very advantageous, and I'm sure the Bills know that stat as well about play action with the way that James Cook is running, especially if they can establish him early, which I have no doubt they can with the way that offensive line is playing. That really could open up things downfield, and if Allen starts hitting some of those intermediate shots, it just makes life so much easier for the offense as a whole, because then you have to worry about that, and then it goes back to Cook. And if you can be, a two-headed monster on offense in this game, I think the Bills can really reestablish themselves as a true Super Bowl contender after this game.
Ryan, why don't you let our listeners know how they can get your stuff, read your stuff, listen to you guys on the internet and all that. And then I got one more comment and kind of want your thoughts on this tweet I'm going to read to you when you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find my work at Syracuse.com and NYUp.com. You can find the Shout Buffalo Football Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and X when we go live, and then on your favorite podcast platform.
All right. So I follow Kurt Warner on Twitter, one of the best follows there is. And he put up a tweet today that I read and I thought was interesting. I wanted to read it to you and get your thoughts. And obviously this kind of works towards Josh Allen. Kurt Warner said this: I've mentioned many times that I won the MVP one year. I threw 22 interceptions. 22. So if you just looked at my mistakes, shoot, I probably deserved to be benched a few times. But what wasn't lost on my coaches, and I guess the voters, was everything I did outside of those mistakes to also be a reason we were winning and going 14-2. Too many people get this equation mixed up and spend all their time looking at the wrong things. 22 interceptions is what? 1.5 mistakes a game. What player doesn't make at least 3 times that in any game? I say it all the time. Perspective is anything. Do we got Josh Allen too bottled up? Do we need to let him free?
Yes, and I love that tweet. No, 100% you have to. It's one of those things where I feel like The Bills have been they've almost like drilled it into his head. Protect the football. Let's have these long sustained drives. Maybe they've pointed out the fact that they don't trust the defense. And if we can keep our defense off the field, keep them a little bit fresher, we're going to win games. And for the first 4 weeks of the season, that worked, despite minus the Jets game, every one of those games being pretty close and down to the wire, especially against teams that really they probably should have been able to put away a lot earlier, like New Orleans, like Miami. And now you look at that formula, and they're sitting here now at 5-2, but you've got to unleash Allen at some point, and you live with the mistakes because, like you said, a mistake and a half per game, you can live with that if it also means Allen's taking off and ripping off a 40-yard scramble here and there, and finding someone deep downfield. You go back to that Chiefs game years ago where Dawson Knox went wild downfield, and obviously it was a much different roster. They had Sanders at the time who was getting open, Diggs. It's obviously a much different skill set than what they have now in this wide receiver room, but letting him play loose and free and just kind of throw the ball around the playground, so to speak, it led to good things. And I'm not advocating for him to throw 40, 45 times against Kansas City, but let him play without the fear of making a mistake. If he makes a mistake, so be it. You're going to live to see another day with Allen. You look at the Baltimore game and how quickly he was able to bring them back and put up points when things were ugly for 3+ quarters there. That was just kind of a reminder, and I hope the Bills can kind of go back that far and say, okay, he was Superman when we needed him to be. Let's let him be Superman without getting ourselves into a 15-point hole in the fourth quarter.
Well said, Mr. Talbot. We appreciate your time here on the show, and as always, thank you very much, and we hopefully have you on in the future. But this has been On the Beat on the Overreaction Buffalo Sports Network, presented by FanDuel. As always, folks, thank you. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. For Ryan, I'm the Big O, Jerry Ostrowski. We'll catch you next week right here, Tuesday at 8 Eastern. So, as always, folks, much love. Go Bills. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you very much.